pace of European security architecture has accelerated amid tensions between Washington, Brussels, and Moscow.
U.S. factory was hit in a Russian airstrike in Ukraine. What's your reaction to that?
I'm not happy about it.
There are two concrete cases that have raised the stakes. On August 20, a Russian drone exploded on NATO territory in the Polish village of Osiny. And on August 21, a flex facility owned by the US was hit by Russian missiles in Mukachevo, western Ukraine. Poland's defense minister described it as Russian provocation. The prosecutor's office shared findings pointing to a Belarusian direction. When US property is targeted, the question of how to respond automatically comes to the fore in Washington. Indeed, the debate in the US media and institutions over how this strike, carried out while peace talks are ongoing, will affect the language at the negotiating table has intensified. At this point, it is essential to draw a line. The physical damage to a factory does not, on its own, determine the course of the war, but it accelerates the political clock. Despite differing messages at the presidential level in the US public sphere, the phrase "US property was targeted" produces a single outcome within the bureaucracy. A broader security package becomes legally and politically legitimate. Indeed, shortly after the incident, the headline "Trump is not happy with this attack" was published directly. This statement may appear soft in domestic political language, but in Washington, not happy means it's on the radar, a response will be given. Trump's statement, "I am not satisfied," must be read correctly here. In domestic politics, this may appear to be soft language. However, in the US bureaucracy, "I am not satisfied" means accelerate the options to the technical wing of the executive branch. When this reflex is applied to the field, three axes work simultaneously. Long-range firepower that will make Ukraine's deep targets risky, a layered defense mass that will protect the airspace, and mechanized armored and training components that will produce decision superiority on the front lines. Two shelves are realistically on the table for deep strikes: ground-launched precision munitions and air-launched cruise missiles. On the ground side, a mix of ATACMS family variants is decisive. The M39A1's steel-cased DPIC payload creates area pressure on air defense batteries, parked aircraft, dense equipment clusters and logistics in open areas. Derivatives with unitary warheads, such as the 300-kilometer range M48 or M57, are effective against point targets such as bridge abutments, secondary fuel depots, shelter entrances and command centers. The 300-kilometer range version covers most of the logistics nodes in northern Crimea, central Donbass, Kursk, Belgorod. Relaxing partial targeting restrictions doubles the political significance of this range. The trio of rear area fuel, rail intermediate depots remains under constant pressure day and night. The ERGM-LRS's 150-plus kilometer class and one-shot, one-target economy forces stockpiles just behind the front lines into constant movement. This movement increases the decision windows captured by Ukrainian UAVs. If the political ceiling rises further and selected derivatives of the PRSM family, range 500-plus km, come into play, the command nerve endings of the A2AD network on the Crimea-Rostov axis and the logistical lifelines around Kerch come under permanent threat. This makes the strategic claim of holding Crimea mathematically costly. The US can organize its allies on the air side. An increase in the number and tempo of Storm Shadow, Scalp strikes would give Ukraine the ability to deliver surgical strikes against hard underground targets. When used in combination with radar jamming and decoy targets during periods when Russian air defenses are stretched thin by training and maintenance programs, command shelters and ammunition depots become visible at any moment. If Berlin unlocks the political lock, Taurus provides higher penetration than Storm Shadow against targets with large section bridge piers and thick concrete masses. This means that land transport, the Chonhar-Armiansk E-105 Kerch chain, can be cut off in succession. The combined effect of these families forces Russia to thicken its air defense layer around Crimea-Azov. The thickened layer produces thinning in other sectors. Each thinned sector represents a new window for HIMARS, ATACMS, ERGM-LRS. The second ring in the US dimension: intensification of air defense and the air picture. Patriot rotations, AMRAAM supplies, electronic warfare support, sensor data sharing, and air-ground kill chain integration. These headlines will reverse Moscow's forcing the issue at a high-cost strategy, even if a brigade does not deploy to the field. Because it is not the firing of the expensive Patriot that deters, but its mere presence there. Deterrence is not concrete, it is tempo. When the tempo increases, the strategic value of cheap platforms decreases. This is precisely why Mukachevo is not just a factory, it is a notch that increases the tempo. The SAID-DAID layer is the real multiplier of F-16 operations, increasing the number of HAR munitions with more advanced versions, false target, decoys, mold-class decoy jammer, and redundant targeting networks challenges the radar discipline of S-300-400 batteries. When the radar shuts down, an air corridor opens, and the opened corridor reduces the close approach risk of Storm Shadow, Scalp. Adding AIM 120C78's density and Link 16 network umbrella to F-16s narrows the approach profile of Russian A-50U patrols. This means a wider eye for Ukraine's air picture and a shorter window in the Russian bombing profile. As the air picture becomes clearer, the target refresh rate of HIMARS ATACMS fire increases. This rate eliminates the luxury of living without moving for Russian air defense. Another axis is land elements. The combined deployment of M1 Abrams and M2A2 Bradley in the mechanized armored component produces decision superiority on the front. The Abrams thermal sight package and stabilization capability increase the likelihood of being first to see and first to strike. Active protection and reactive armor improvements increase the likelihood of survival against top attack FPV, Stugna-class threats. The Abrams is effective not as a lone attack coach, but when used in conjunction with the Bradley Infantry Engineering UAV-I. The M2A2's 25mm armor-piercing ammunition and TAOW-2AB ATGM create a clearing strip in close and medium-range tank hunting. Dismounted infantry quickly establishes a foothold within the trench networks. A small drone swarm clears the next intersection. This combination extinguishes Russian mechanized assaults further back in defensive lines, while accelerating Ukraine's tactical level pincer maneuvers. As Bradley density increases, Russian forces experience armored suspension engine track wear and tear and daytime immobility syndrome. This disrupts the logistical rhythm. Training and institutional capacity determine the impact factor of each platform deployed. Combined combat training periods implemented by the US at Grafenwohr Hohenfels can deliver accelerated packages of modules such as fire support coordination, air-ground kill chain integration, and maintenance supply cycle management to brigade battalion personnel. The UAV and counter-UAV heading plays a critical role in the cheap response to cheap pressure principle. New blocks of Switchblade 600 class heavy loitering munitions provide a low-cost aim-weight strike cycle against armored and command vehicles 40+ kilometers behind the front lines. Phoenix Ghost and its derivatives spread pressure day and night. This breaks Russian FPV saturation attacks. This extends the life of fortifications and forward supply lines. Every hour gained feeds the target confirmation cycle of the F-16 ATACMS Storm Shadow chain. Engineering and breaching kits complete the armored mechanized package. The M58 Miklik maintains speed in mined areas. Heavy bridge systems, tactical bridges, tracked bridge vehicles prevent the assault momentum from dropping in narrow water obstacles and trenches. If mine detection is integrated with MATV-class EOD vehicles and mini-UAVs in the field, losses decrease. This makes the Russian side's field filling and remining tactics temporarily costly. If the cleared corridor is used quickly, the Russian artillery's counter-battery window closes. After the attack, there were open calls from US security circles. Retired US Army General Jack Keane said the option of deploying a US brigade to Ukraine, with European armies remaining in the backbone and the US taking on logistics, intelligence, and management functions, should be put on the table. This is not a decision, but the idea illustrates how far the framework can be stretched. Because while diplomatic channels such as peace talks and the Alaska meeting are ongoing, such proposals for engagement on the ground serve as test balloons. How they are received, how far they go, and what the immediate positions of the various political blocs are, all of this is measured. Meanwhile, the question of whether Europe will send troops is not independent of these two events. After the summit in Paris on February 26, 2024, when Emmanuel Macron said that nothing should be ruled out. European politics spent days debating this statement. Some interpreted this as an implicit threat, while others saw it as a balance between training at home, escalation abroad. As the calendar progressed, hybrid options such as sending trainers and training within Ukraine were discussed more frequently in practice. In the summer of 2025, Reuters reported that France was considering sending trainers to Ukraine. Lithuania said it could support such a decision if done in coordination with allies. Training on the ground is not the same as sending a military brigade, but the bar that determines the next steps is rising step by step. In mid-August 2025, Macron initiated the deployment of a peacekeeping force comprising 10 countries to Ukraine. At this point, the question, why didn't NATO strike, inevitably arises. The answer lies not in technical weakness but in political mandate. NATO's air policing mission, conducted on a 24-hour basis, monitors the sky and prevents violations. However, the coverage area of the integrated air and missile defense system is NATO airspace. There is no no-fly zone over Ukraine, and this is a deliberate decision made to keep the escalation under control. On the night of Osiny, while Poland stated that there was no airspace violation, rapid reaction jets were already in the air. Engagements were kept within the legal authority zone. The shield worked within the authority zone. This sentence is the technical equivalent of the de-escalation strategy. The issue is not just a question of where, the question of at what speed is just as decisive. Speaking of speed, countermeasures were not delayed. The Netherlands announced that it would deploy 2 Patriot batteries and approximately 300 personnel to Poland for a specified period. This deployment is a concrete decision to strengthen the engagement ring on the eastern flank. A burnt ring in a field has raised the rhythm of a multi-billion-dollar air defense architecture. This is precisely what we mean when we talk about the cheap platform, expensive tempo equation. Upper middle layer systems such as Patriot work not only with missile ranges, but also with echoes in the political memory. Deterrence is a matter of rhythm before concrete and steel. The long-term impact of the Mukachevo attack is the legal legitimization of security packages that will protect Western companies' rear-front investments in Ukraine. Thus, the trio of air defense mass, communicate information sharing, and energy logistics protection accelerates. The protection of F-16 deployments are part of this trio. The mobile base approach and more intensive work on radar missile drone networks are natural consequences. The field is already pushing for this. Osiny and Mukachevo have become the political accelerators. So, what has NATO done concretely, and what will it do? The first step is to reinforce the shield within Poland. This means increasing the frequency of air policing sorties, AWACS patrols, rotations of mid-tier systems like IRIS-T NASAMS, and the density of sensor networks within the border. Some will say, you keep saying the same thing after every incident. That is correct, because this is the right protocol. The shield is strengthened on NATO territory. Steps such as no-fly zones or automatic counterstrikes are kept out of the discussion. The strategic goal is not to escalate, but to make deterrence visible and continuous enough to be effective. Deviating from this line would play into the aggressor's strategy, drawing the alliance into an expensive war with cheap platforms. Instead, the alliance has chosen to neutralize cheap pressure with expensive platforms. In this context, European countries have also accelerated their internal timelines. Discussions about deploying trainers in the field are a reflection of this. France's statement that it can send trainers, Lithuania's emphasis on yes, if with allies, and the Baltic states' openness to training inside Ukraine options. These are not the kind of Western concessions Moscow was expecting, but they are interim solutions that harden the language at the table and meet the need for a faster pace on the ground. Training in the field does not mean sending troops, but it is an important break in the political psychology. The magnitude of that break will be determined by the Osiny-Mukachevo type incidents that will be repeated in the coming weeks. What was Moscow's calculation? To create grey zone pressure with low-cost platforms at the border and in the rear, forcing NATO into an expensive and exhausting tempo. But the opposite happened. On August 21st, the Dutch government announced its decision to deploy 2 Patriot batteries and approximately 300 personnel to Poland, a clear step that immediately thickened the engagement ring on the eastern flank. Why do we consider this a critical mistake from Putin's perspective? Because the timing and target set reinforced rather than disrupted internal balance in the counterblock. The phrase US property allows Washington to use both diplomatic and military instruments on a legitimate basis. Reuters data, on the wave of attacks, shows that the action was not just a routine provocation. 574 drones and 40 missiles indicate that this was not a test, but a wave. Such a wave pushes the US public opinion to the point of cannot be ignored. Discussions in the Senate and House of Representatives to reframe support for Ukraine also accelerate for this reason. Indeed, reports on the Washington Post's end-of-summer sessions show that new funds are passing through committee stages more quickly and that long-term programs such as USAI are being highlighted. This acceleration weakens the Kremlin's assumption that time is on our side. There was a simultaneous hardening on the European side. The EU's 18th sanctions package was approved in mid-July. The G7 price cap was lowered to 47.6, and measures were tightened in areas such as the shadow fleet and financial access. As part of the same line, the EU and the UK introduced a new wave of sanctions directly targeting Russia's shadow tanker fleet. These two moves are designed to narrow Russia's revenue channels and stifle its war economy. This pressure on energy revenues, combined with Ukraine's rear area attacks, has produced fuel shocks and logistical disruptions in the domestic market. Every item whose price rises or whose supply is disrupted is slowing down Russia's long war plan. The fuel shocks and logistical gaps Russia is experiencing on the home front, combined with these external developments, have made the Kremlin's playing for time argument more fragile. Since the summer, Ukrainian attacks on refineries have caused disruptions and queues in fuel supplies. Even Moscow's export bans and interventions in the domestic market have struggled to bring prices down. This picture illustrates that the war economy has reached its limits in the cheap production, expensive defense dilemma. The common denominator of all these components is not to offer Ukraine a one-shot miracle, but to keep Russia's decision-making and supply cycles under simultaneous pressure. More Patriots, more frequent NASAMS IRIS-T, intensive AT-CMS, ERGMLRS, Storm Shadow, Scalp, and if possible Taurus. On top of that, the Abrams-Bradley engineering triad and accelerated combined training. The result of this mix will be an accelerated version of the pattern seen on the ground for 3 years. Delays in Russian command flow, thinning of the air defense network, grey areas in fuel, ammunition flow, and loss of initiative at the battalion level. The missile that hit US property punched a hole in concrete. The accelerated package punched a hole in Russia's decision cycle. These two incidents have cornered Putin. Whether or not Russia's move was deliberate is irrelevant. This was simply a critical mistake on Putin's part, because these two moves did not give Putin any tactical advantage. On the contrary, they exposed his hand, and most importantly, what comes next is a source of fright for Putin. Putin may have tried something, but his move backfired. Now the alliance and the US are in a position to establish a much stronger, faster, and legally justified mechanism for Ukraine. Thank you for watching.